Alright, welcome to this bonus lesson in Module 2 of the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course. Like I mentioned, this video is going to be very quick. I'm just going to show you a couple of tips and reiterate the importance of the use of dynamic subdivision when you're blocking. Alright, so I'm going to jump straight into it. And this is basically the same character that we end up with in the previous video or the last video of this module. So what I want to talk about is one of the most common mistakes or rookie mistakes that you can make, or anyone that is learning ZBrush will make, that is getting into too much details too fast, or having something that is not as solid in terms of the silhouette or the primary shape, and start adding details and then having to go back and tweak it. So right now, let's go ahead and select the head of my character here. And again, this is not part of the workflow. You don't have to do any of that. I'm just gonna demonstrate it with the character, but this is pure theory rather than any practice for the actual model that we're working on. So one of the tools that I have here in ZBrush is called the clone tool. So it's gonna take any subtool that you have selected and it's gonna clone it into a different tool. So I'm gonna use that, just a demonstration. So I still have my entire model here, but in case I don't wanna, well, in this case, I don't want to mess around with the progress that we've done. So I'm just going to clone it. And now I have the head as a separate tool. All right. So this head, the clone comes with everything, right? It has the dynamic subdivision and everything else. So I'm going to increase the subdivision to, let's say, 4. And I'm going to apply this dynamic subdivision. In the course, we haven't actually I explained what apply does, but we actually haven't done it to the pieces. And in this case, I'm going to apply it just to show you what it does. And now I have 5 levels of subdivision. So if I turn on my polyframe, and this is the standard UI. Again, we're not in working mode for the course. This is just a tip. And I have this enable as well, the polyframe enable with the lines. And I have the level 1. Now, this is pretty much what we're doing in the course right now. We're just tweaking these shapes, and we're using dynamic subdivision to make sure that we get this right. But one of the problems that I see often is that people will start working and tweaking shapes at a very high subdivision level, regardless of whether you have subdivision levels or simply a very high resolution mesh. And then you're going to end up with something that looks very blobby in a way. So I'm going to use the move brush to start trying to adjust this and create kind of like an eyebrow for this guy. And I have the AccuCurve enabled, so I'm going to turn that off. All right. And of course, I can go with the smooth brush and try to smooth this as well. So this is just to give you an example of one of the mistakes that are often made, someone that is starting with ZBrush. And then you probably see this often as well. If someone is very new to ZBrush, not in the sense of not knowing what the tools do or what the different processes in ZBrush are actually used for, but in the workflow itself and the way that characters are presented and so on and so forth. So the problem now is that I'm starting to move too many polygons to try to adjust the primary shapes. And that's always going to result in something really blobby and really bad. So if you look at this, it's full of these blobs, which is, they're not ideal. So you can sort of tell what the lumpy areas are, very bumpy. And yeah, you can say, you know what, this is not that bad. We can actually go ahead and use the smooth brush and start smoothing everything out. And that's totally fair. The problem is that even if I use the smooth brush with an intensity of 100, right, it's going to be very hard to remove this, because we are actually trying to change the primary shapes of this head, right? And that is because we're doing it at the subdivision level 5. And that, again, that's trying to reiterate the process that we're doing here in the Ultimate ZBrush Guide. It's much easier, right, to edit a simple cube or a mesh that is made out of like a few vertices, right, without getting this result of this lumpy effect, these bumps, right? It's much easier to edit this, and if you want to actually see this in a much more smoother preview, that's when we use the dynamic subdivision. Now, that is not to say that you cannot have multiple subdivision levels. And in fact, having multiple subdivision levels is another key element of ZBrush that allows you to jump back between, level 1 and in this case, level 5 to adjust primary shape. So this is something that you're probably going to deal with later on as well in other projects that you work on, that you have multiple subdivision levels. So level 1 and level 5. But once you have multiple subdivision levels, the idea is that anything that is related to the shape, to the primary shape, let's say these are the primary shapes, the ones that I sort of highlighted here, that is all done in the level subdivision 1. And anything that has to do with details, actually let's change this, right? So any details, any wrinkles, or anything like that, that is going to be in the level number 5 or the level of subdivision 5. And that obviously makes sense, right? In level 5, you're going to have much more resolution so that you can describe these details. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that if you want to change the main proportions and do large proportional changes on the character, for example, it's important to remember that it's better to do it in a low resolution. Okay, and this is going to be very evident when we start talking about or working with Dynamesh, because Dynamesh is going to change the resolution of the entire model depending on what you set in the settings. So it's important that if you want to block a character with just Dynamesh, you do it with a low resolution. So in this case, that I have 2 million polygons at this level of subdivision 5. If I want to change the way that the head looks, or maybe tweak the nose or the chin or something, rather than doing it little by little at this level, I would go to the lowest subdivision level, right? And that allows me to change things, like I said, just generate any large proportional changes in this subdivision is going to be much easier and reliable, right? And I can just smooth everything in here and then go back to level 5. All right, so you notice this area that I tweak at the lowest resolution is actually much more, it's much smoother and cleaner than the other parts, right? And of course I can go back to the, let's say, level 2 and use the smooth brush to start smoothing this. The problem is that because I did those changes at the level 5 or 4, ZBrush remember those. So every time that I move forward, one subdivision level forward, is going to reproject or is going to show me those details a bit more subtly than before, but they're still going to be there. So I have to basically go one subdivision level at a time, smoothing everything that I did just to get back into this sort of very smooth object. And of course, like I said, we're going to get to all those details and really have fun adding some details very, very, very soon. But it's important to understand that anything that has to do with the blocking and the generation of the mesh to set up the proportions and the distance between the wrist and the elbow of the character, or the proportion between the legs and the torso, anything that has to do with that stage of the process, which is obviously what we've been doing, the blocking, it should be done at a very, very low resolution so that we can adjust things very, very quickly. And when we move into details, it's going to be much better. We can maintain a very clean mesh. All right, so that's it for this tip, for this bonus lesson of the second module in the Ultimate ZBrush Guide. Now, I just want to mention something very briefly. The systematic approach of this course and the way that I've been designing the learning process is kind of like layering information and knowledge about the different features in ZBrush step by step and, module by module and lesson by lesson, right? So we've been adding new things on top of each other to sort of build up the knowledge of ZBrush, right? But this tip is more about the workflow rather than the actual tools, because ultimately ZBrush is just a tool, right? And I can guarantee you that by the end of this course, if you put in the time and follow the steps, you're going to be super comfortable with ZBrush and you will be able to do anything that you want. But just remember that ZBrush is just a tool, right? So this tip that I'm giving you it has to do more with the workflow, like how to approach anything in the sculpting environment. So if for some reason you decide to move to a different software that is not ZBrush, or a better software comes along, right? We make the change. The principle is still there, right? We're starting from the most basic and primitive shapes, and then we start building up details and whatever else. But it is important to understand that this is kind of like the baseline, the most important part of any workflow. So whether it's an environment or a prop or a series of characters, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Even if you're copying from a concept, it's important to get the primary shapes right before you move to secondary or even tertiary shapes, right? So just keep that in mind. And again, this is something that I'm going to keep reiterating and showing you step by step in the following modules and so on. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is kind of like one of the most important things in terms of workflow. Start with very simple shapes and build your way up the same way that we've been doing it in this course. All right, so I'm going to leave this one here and I'll see you in the next module.